Today I'm going to review for you James by Percival Everett. This is a retelling of The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain. So I did read that book in anticipation of this, but I'm really glad I did because I really got a clear sense of the way that Everett is sort of playing off that book and really using it as a starting point for the tale that he wants to tell. James starts off the same as The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. Huck Finn is escaping from his father and has actually faked his own demise and is on the run. Jim, or James as I'll call him from now on because that's what he's called in this book, is on the run because he found out that he's going to be sold by his owner. The two set off and end up on quite a few adventures as they go down the Mississippi. So the basic structure of the book is very much the same, and there are definitely lots of touch points early on. They encounter the robbers on the stranded steamboat. They meet the two con men, the king and the duke. But there's a lot of divergence here from the original text in interesting ways. Even during the sections that sort of closely align to the adventures of Huckleberry Finn, there are subtle changes, like little just sort of tweaks here and there. And they kind of build and grow as the book kind of reaches its crescendo and reaches its finale. James at the start plays things a little more realistically, and he definitely addresses some of the issues that I think most modern readers would have with the adventures of Huckleberry Finn. Because even though Twain's heart was in the right place for sure, he wrote Huck Finn primarily as a commentary on the inhumanity and hypocrisy of slavery. But the text itself does have elements that we would not accept today. For one thing, it has a sort of condescending attitude towards Jim in the book, and really, slaves in general. There's some infantilizing going on. There is sort of othering, but when they start talking about how he knows things like the birds, indicate it's going to rain, these sort of quasi-magical aspects of slaves. It's sort of the romanticism of that. That's all in Twain's original work. So it's really interesting to see how Everett takes that from Twain's work and turns it on its head. One of the primary sort of conceits of this book is that Jim and the other slaves talk a certain way in front of white people so they don't seem too educated. Jim doesn't let on that he knows how to read and write and has read some of the classic in Judge Thatcher's library. This is not a long book. It reads very easily. I got through this in about 3 days, I think, total. And I think what's interesting about it is that Mark Twain's tale was kind of a boy's adventure sort of tale. So it's kind of rambling and episodic. This is much more focused. It's also darker and has depictions of slave life that go beyond what we saw in Huck Finn for sure. The world that James lives in is brutal. There are brutal things that happen. There are horrifying things that happen. There are times within the book where Huck and Jim were separated. And this book definitely takes advantage of that early on to let Jim have his own experiences and his own adventures. Until eventually the book kind of just forgets about Huck Finn and becomes very much its own thing. It fixes some of the issues I had with Twain's work. And mostly that's just kind of down to some of the rambling, repetitive nature of it. This is much more streamlined, which, isn't always necessarily a good thing to me in a book. But it was here because it kept it very much focused on James's struggle, his struggle to have this rich interior life, to live with a constant state of fear of not just being a runaway slave and getting caught in death, but also just remembering how to speak depending on who he's talking to. And at times in this book, we are confronted by the fact that the sort of dividing line between slave and master is ridiculously flimsy because it's based on appearances, and appearances can be deceiving. Everett does some interesting things with the relationship between Huck and James in this book. And I think I've already seen, I went, and looked on Goodreads after I read it, because sometimes I just like to kind of get, other people's thoughts. And I saw some people complaining about how it changed their relationship from the original story. And those always kind of bother me, those complaints, because the original story is there. The original story has been there for a very long time and it will remain. This is its own story. And so when changes are made, it doesn't ruin anything about the original story, because James Everett is not really trying to retell the adventures of Huck Finn word for word from Jim's perspective. That's the starting point, but I think this book evolves far beyond that into something that is at times lyrical, harrowing. There are moments of satire that are, in the spirit of Twain, and I did find those amusing. But it's in the context of so much richness that is expressed very simply. Everett has a really simple writing style, and I adored it. The text isn't trying to replace Huckleberry Finn, but is having a conversation with that. And I think that's so important for art in general, for writing in particular. This is a great book. I definitely recommend it. I'm very glad that I read this. And I'm really interested in reading Orbital now to see what could have beat this as far as the Booker Prize goes, because I really was taken with James.